At Simply Modified, we are shining a light on the complexities of dysphagia. In our series Dysphagia Bite, we speak with passionate individuals who are at the heart of dysphagia care to share their practical insights, emerging ideas, and real stories from the field. These bite-sized interviews are designed to inform, inspire, and connect us all in the shared goal of better mealtime experiences. In episode 3, we're joined by Yvonne McClaren, author, chef, and advocate, who shares her journey with dysphagia after head and neck cancer, her experience with food texture modification, and the inspiring resources she's creating to support others. A reminder that these interviews are for general education purposes and don't replace medical advice. If there's one message to take away from this, it's that dysphagia is highly individual, so be sure to connect with your own healthcare team for personalised support. Okay, so today on Dysphagia Bite, we're joined by Yvonne McClaren, an author and chef who, after being diagnosed with tonsil cancer back in 2018 and undergoing extensive treatment, Yvonne spent about 15 months with reliance on a peg feed to support her intake. Her journey back to oral eating and drinking has inspired her to create the commensality comeback, a really driven approach about the nature of social eating and its importance in helping everyone's recovery, to rebuild confidence and that reconnection with the joy of food. So welcome, Yvonne.
Hello. No, thanks for having me, Bree. Good to be here.
Yeah. Look, this has been a long time in the works for me. I think a lot of the interviews I'm doing in this space are very much with other professionals in the field, but of course you're both a professional with that chef background and then also that lived experience of head and neck cancer. So there's so much value in your responses today. So thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. You're welcome. And look, it's been a few years since I did my chef qualification, I might add. I've done a few things since then, but certainly my love of food and being a foodie and being asked to audition for MasterChef kind of puts me very squarely in the food and wine, parameters, because I did fly around Australia visiting wineries for a big part of my career as well. Someone had to do it, and anyway, so I put my hand up. So yes, I mean, and we were just talking before you started recording about that social eating and why I'm so driven to do it. So I'll be quiet and let you ask the questions. Otherwise, I'll just keep talking.
No, and that's okay. That's the beauty of this. I'm very much driven by, I want to hear everything you've got to say. So that's fine. Before we do jump into that, though, I would love to just get a bit more about your background. So if you could share a little bit about your story, about your swallowing difficulties and how the tonsil cancer kind of came about for you. So symptom-wise, like what were you looking for and maybe some of that treatment that was involved, if you don't mind.
Sure. Well, let me just preface all of this by saying I fainted when I had my ears pierced. So therein lies my entire medical experience. Little did I know, I was actually relocating to live in Saigon and I had a sore throat, and my aging mother, was starting to not look too good, and I just put it down to stress. Resigning from my job, renting my house out, moving to Vietnam to live, and obviously dealing with my mother. I just put it down to stress, and so off I went, and then I was wrongly diagnosed a couple of times whilst in Vietnam, with no disrespect to their medical system, but I just knew something wasn't right. So I came back to home, which is Adelaide in South Australia, and my GP told me off severely for not telling her that the antibiotics hadn't worked. And within weeks, I was diagnosed with stage 4, and it was an aggressive stage 4 oropharyngeal cancer in my left tonsil. And in many ways, I say this now, it didn't really surprise me because as a child I had lots of tonsil issues. I always had tonsillitis, and that's what people kept telling me it was. And I thought, no, this is not that. It's quite different. As a result of that, I was whipped very quickly into hospital here after having biopsies and things. I had a third of my tongue removed, a tumour about the size of 2 walnuts, both tonsils. I had 30 lymph nodes and a neck dissection removed, chemo and radiotherapy. The radiotherapy is the thing that probably caused the worst of my dysphagia. And in fact, I was told that the radiotherapists are the most disliked people on the planet. And I'd have to agree with that, poor people. Who would do that? So I never went back to Vietnam. I had just won my silver role. I'd been working through the Le Cordon Bleu hotel school system. I was using every person that I knew in my network through Europe. So I'd done a lot of work to get this role to do what I wanted to do in Vietnam around food. And obviously that all just disappeared. I lost my life. Not physically, but figuratively, certainly I did. And so I had to build again. Now, did I answer the question? I don't know.
Yeah,
right?
you absolutely did. And I just feel like, hats off to you, the fact that you really advocated for, no, there's something else going on here. It's not just my tonsils playing up, like there's more to it. And I feel like it's such a shame when the medical system doesn't hit the nail on the head right away. And I don't think it's anyone's intention, but sometimes patients just aren't listened to in the way that they really need to be. And those concerns were valid along the way. So it's really nice that eventually you were able to get that response that you needed so that you could get the treatment and along the way, despite how difficult radiation therapy is to go through. Obviously it was needed in your case and that you were able to navigate that, but gosh, well done.
I was very nearly not here, and I didn't know that until many, maybe even 2 years after my treatment. And I actually asked my oncologist, and he said, oh, well, put it this way, Yvonne, if we hadn't done it then and there, you wouldn't be here. And that didn't really hit home until I went down and sat in my car in the hospital car park, and then I kind of lost it, obviously. So it puts a slightly different slant on life, and at that point, I I woke up in intensive care right outside the nurses' station, and it's not good when you're right outside the nurses' station. And they kind of looked at me when I woke up and said, are you all right? And I went, I had no idea. Couldn't talk. I couldn't. I remember first meeting a speech-language pathologist, and she came to my bedside once they'd moved me to a ward, and she walked in clutching this airline container of thickened water. I didn't even know that was a thing, and she said, can you swallow that? I had no hope of swallowing that water. And at that point, that's when the fear really hit me. And I thought, no, what is this? This is just not real. I didn't even know speech language pathology was a thing. I certainly didn't know that I was never going to be able to swallow again. And I was actually told that I may have that peg tube for life. And that's when I just went, no, absolutely not. This is not happening to me. My whole life kind of flashed before my eyes, and I looked at all my hiking, my traveling, my global culinary life just disappeared. So that was my purpose, and that was my impetus to get off that peg tube back to oral eating.
And such a journey you went on. I think, as I said in that intro, it was about 15 months with the peg tube. And sometimes there is, for some people, it's a lifelong thing, and I'll get into another episode about that. But for you, it was very much a recovery of balancing the peg tube with oral eating and exploring that to bring that back for yourself. What did that journey look like from you? Obviously, it's probably a bit hard to fit it into the time frame we've got, but what was some of the really key aspects at your journey back to oral eating?
Well, interestingly, I had, I've done this on my own. I didn't have a permanent caregiver, a partner at that point. So I did this all on my own. And sadly, I didn't get a lot of assistance from dietitians or speech language pathologists. I didn't really get a lot of help from anybody. It was more of a case of shove the peg in. Here's a box of, enteral feed. Go home, don't lose weight, and make sure you keep your protein up. And that was pretty much, and I think there was a photocopied printout of how to use the REAP. Who knew? So I just had to work it out myself. The last thing I remember hearing was, well, there were two things, and I do talk about communication and the use of language in my online program about this, because I do say to clinicians, be really careful what you say to patients, because the things that I remember being told was, you may have it for life. And the other thing that I was told was that the treatment hadn't worked and they didn't know my life expectancy. They were the two things I took away from this really horrible thing that happened to me. And as it turned out, neither were true. But given the drugs I was on and what I was doing, that's just the two things that I remember. So, I just had to learn it myself. So I really recorded what I did on a day-to-day basis over those months, and how I actually transitioned off that peg tube back to physically eating again, because you get removed from food. You don't buy it. And I might add, I was also in the middle of COVID with this, so I didn't have the fear of missing out because no one was going anywhere anyway. And so, I kind of had to work it out myself. So, and they didn't actually tell me about trismus. And, at that point, I had that.
Yeah.
So, I actually
this as well, meaning that rigidity and that real difficulty due to things like radiation therapy as well.
Was radiation.
That real tightness and rigidity, which makes it difficult to bite, makes it difficult to chew, to contain the bolt. Like, there's so much to it. Yeah. Oh, Yvonne, honestly, like, this is such, your lived experience is so important for me to hear. And hopefully everyone listening, it infuriates them as much as it does me as the clinician, because there's that big gap in the industry where speech pathologists and dietitians, we support people in that assessment and that kind of medical model of, here's your peg, or here's your modified diet or fluids. And then it's very much like when you said the handout, off you go. Like, what happens at home? Where's the implementation? Where's the support? And of course, this program that I'm doing, I'm really trying to advocate for more resources are needed in that space. And I'll pick your about it at the end here, Yvonne, because I know you've got a lot to add in this space as well, an experience. But it's just such a shame that the system really fails people, and it fails people. The quality of life is different. Your whole world changes when you leave that hospital and go.
It's a different life.
Yeah.
It took me 2 years to be able to put lipstick on. Cleaning your teeth, you had to learn how to floss your teeth differently. And trust me, when you're 50 years old, you've got a certain way that you clean your teeth and your gums and what. Because all your teeth move. I used to have perfectly straight teeth, and I was so proud of them. And I had to relearn everything. So the trismus was, I made my own jack, and I did that by measuring my fingers and then creating a stack of tongue depressors that were the same, and I put a number on them, and then I put a timer on my phone, and I would sit there and jack my mouth open until I could literally get a spoon of food in my mouth. So that was kind of part of it. But prior to that, it was there was things with my mind, the physicalities of what I was dealing with, the loss of saliva, taste, And because I was being pig tube fed, you are so removed from real food. You don't buy it, you don't shop for it, you don't prepare meals, you don't wash vegetables or fruit, or you just don't do any of it. And you just get more and more and more removed from food. So I started documenting what was happening to me, and then I really called on my old marketing and event programming and professional development education, and then wrote the program about how I actually did it and went about it. Because when I was in hospital, clutching that thickened water, and I went to find something online that might help me, cue the crickets. Nothing. All I could find was some American, with no disrespect to the USA, but American social media groups that that were talking about vitamizing a Big Mac and fries and shoving it. Well, I wasn't going to shove that in any orifice, let alone in my pig tube. And that was it. And I thought, wowza, this is not looking good. So that kind of, inspired me to do something. And I really started that process in my hospital bed the day I first met my speechy.
Yeah. And such a nice driver. I agree with you, aren't there? And you're doing such a brilliant job at really advocating and trying to fill that space. Looking back at your journey, what are some of the things you mentioned there that, what a clinician says sticks to patients, and it's really important in the language that people use. What is something that you wish someone had told you from the very early days? Like, what language-wise do you...
All of it. All of it. And I actually thought, Brie, that... Well, I'm referring to head and neck cancer, and the teams and the multidisciplinary teams around those individuals is vast. Remember the ear piercing. I had no clue. I'd never been in hospital, and all of a sudden I had an oncologist, I had a radiotherapist, I had a head and neck cancer nurse, I had a dietitian, I had a speechy. I then added a massage person, a physio, and acupuncture, dry needling. I added all that afterwards, and a naturopath for me. Because remember, I've been told that I wasn't going to be on the coil much longer. So I thought rather naively that people weren't telling me things so that they wouldn't freak me out. I then worked out that because the multidisciplinary team is so vast, they're not talking to each other about me. They're not talking to each other about where I'm at. They're not talking to each other, apart from the records within the hospital system, if they were working and if the internet was up that day. I learned to take my patient code. I nearly had it tattooed on my forehead at one point, so that I could start to manage the communication between my multidisciplinary team. And then I worked out that if I didn't do it, no one was going to do it. So in answer to your question, I think it's really important to be brutally honest with patients. And the one thing that I wish had happened to me was barium tests, the swallowing tests. I didn't get one of those until I pushed for it. And I found that online. I went, oh, maybe I should know what that is. And once I had pushed for that to have happened to me, and I still to this day get the camera up the nose and the whole 9 yards. But it's barium. And I used to film my own swallow off that machine or that or whatever, so I could take it home and actually get it in my head and understand what was going on here. Because until I had a mental picture of what was happening, I couldn't start to modify my food and my drink and work out how that overlay could then be applied to everyday life, my social life, my traveling life, my work life, my whatever life. So, and no one even mentioned it. And It's although this is clinical, you don't need to know. Yeah, I do need to know this, and I think people don't understand how important it is to, you don't have to bombard people with a whole bunch of medical terminology and things, but I think it's very helpful to tell them exactly what's going on with them. And for me, those half-cut models with the what was that ever filming those and getting people to talk to it. And other people who've been through this would just zoom to those models, and they're really hard to get hold of, as you may or may not know.
Clinicians are doing it, but not enough. And so you're right, Yvonne, if you find yourself in a multidisciplinary team where you've got all these brilliant providers around you, but they're not talking, they should be. So if they're not, advocate. Have you spoken to my dietitian? Have you spoken to my GP? Have you spoken to the oncologist? Like, that team meeting needs to happen. It could look like a case conference within a hospital or a general practice setting, or it could look like a multidisciplinary team meeting where we all join up on Zoom and we're talking about my shared goals. That should be happening. It really should be. And again, such a shame that you're having to find yourself in that position to advocate for it, because it should just be standard practice, especially when there's more than kind of 2 or 3 professionals in your team. And then the instrumental assessment, again, like, so integral. Any clients that are looking at enteral feeding, any clients that are looking at returning back to oral, like, be it eating or drinking, needs to have that information. And I think as well, like, the importance of what you mentioned there, like, not just getting the assessment done, but that using it to inform the person with dysphagia, like, use that information so that they know what's going on. It's not just hearsay in the background there with the clinicians whispering to each other. You don't have to use all the fancy terminology. Make sure you're telling that individual. There's a really wonderful term that we use. It's called biofeedback. And how important biofeedback is in providing that person or the individual that's going through it with more knowledge about what's happening. It could look like what you mentioned, how you film yourself eating, that visual feedback. Could look like tactile support. There are more technologies coming out in that space where we can actually follow on the screen. All of that, again, is really integral about your rehab process. But again, if your speech pathologist or your medical team aren't bringing this up, they need to be, because it's out there.
The other thing that I did notice that was never mentioned was IDSI, and I found that on my own, and that's possibly because I'm a food person, but it floored me that wasn't raised, because now I know that people didn't know about it, but because it's such a patient-orientated resource as opposed to a overall clinical resource, you can actually apply it in your own kitchen at home. So anyway, that was the other thing.
Yeah, great point. See, is the
International Dysphagia Diet Standardization Initiative. I'm on the Australian Reference Group, so I had to get that acronym right.
No pressure.
Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. And yes, that kind of rolled out. Oh gosh, I want to say, don't quote me on this.
2019, I think.
Yeah, I was going to say like 5 or more years ago. So it is a relatively new resource. There was other standardized protocols before that, but they were different with each country. So this one is international. It's the idea that we're standardizing it across everyone. Speech pathologists, dietitians should know a lot about it. So again, I feel like that's growing, but you're right. There's so much out there on the ITSI website.
But it shouldn't just be a resource for speech aids and for dietitians, well, not even dietitians, but speech aids, particularly in this area. It is a good enough resource for lay cooks, people at home who just want to cook in their own kitchen, or caregivers feeding their person who's got dysphagia. It's very flexible like that, I think. Anyway, plug for IDSI because it's very good.
Yeah. Okay, let's get in now to talk a little bit about how your social connection of food is such a big driver. Culturally, it's a very significant part of everyone's day. For many cultures, varies, but for the most part, there's a breakfast, there's a lunch, there's a dinner, and a lot of the time that's around other people. So let's talk a little bit about how swallowing difficulties can create a bit of a barrier for that. And what are some of your drivers or facilitators to support that social connection around mealtimes?
Sure. It has a word, and the word is commensality. I call myself the commensality queen, self-titled, and commensality refers to that aspect of social eating. And as I mentioned, I went through my healing during COVID, so it was a bit different for me. Not only was I removed from life like everyone else, but I was also removed from any kind of social interaction with anybody at any level around eating and drinking. And that was to continue on after we kind of got over the COVID drama. I missed major siblings' birthdays, family weddings, closest friends' major birthday. I just literally you cannot and still can't talk, breathe, and eat at the same time. So things that we take for granted, like standing around cooking and picking at, when you're chopping up and you pick at something or you taste something, or platters of food because I had no concept of what I was actually able to swallow, everything became dangerous for me. Now, you're talking to a person who is a qualified chef. I've been in and around food all my life. I know how to manipulate food. I know different food textures. I'm a winemaker too, so my palate is used for discerning flavour, discerning mouthfeel, all those things gone. I couldn't trust. I'm going to cry. Sorry.
Yeah.
I couldn't trust what I'd spent an entire life learning. And that was the first thing that I had to get my head around, all that, first and foremostly. And then eventually, when I got my program together and all my stuff in a row, I went, right, this is a really good pathway to follow should you find yourself in this same situation. I then decided I was going to walk across Spain. So I thought, right, well, if anything is going to test my food confidence, it is walking, breathing, hiking, talking to strangers, and then trying to eat in a foreign land with a foreign menu, and then try to explain what's going on to you using Google Translate. So that's what drives me. You lose all social connection. Things that you take for granted are no longer available to you. So it's a really big psychosomatic change and mind shift. And I think that's something that, whether that falls to speech language pathologists or the multidisciplinary team, I do not know, but I think it's really important that that is mentioned to patients. Know this, that this is probably, maybe, if you're really lucky, it won't happen to you, but you're going to lose all your food confidence and you're going to withdraw from social life because it's just too bloody hard. And that's what happened. So I'm really driven to make sure that travel experiences, hospitality, hotels, cafe, people know what this is. And even to the point now where I now wear a little, because I've got a disability. I had to come to accept that too. And I'm going off track here, I know, but I'm going to tell you this funny story. This young woman who was, I think I was getting a facial or something. I was talking to her in reception at the clinic, and she said, "Oh, have you lost your tongue?" And I said, "Yeah," because we were talking about what had happened to me. And she said, "Oh, you're an amputee." And I went, "I guess I am." So, you kind of learn things. And I just think it's really important to give everybody all the information so that they can prepare. And that goes for helping caregivers too, that are sitting there going, well, what do I cook for this person? How do we eat together? How do we maintain our relationship around food? How do we go and have our normal takeaway Thai, Chinese food on Friday night, whatever it is? So that's what drives me to do this and try and bridge that gap between what happens when you leave the clinic, the hospital, and you get home to your own kitchen.
Yeah, brilliant. And thank you for speaking so openly about your experience. It's a big one. It's a really big one, but it's an important one, and we need to be listening to these experiences because, as I said, that gap, it's not appropriate. We need to be working on resources so that there is that support there. As you said, I feel like that big shift in someone's own self-concept, their narrative, as you said, it's acquiring a disability in a way, be it an amputee, the kind of narrative or lingo you want to give it, it's your narrative. And it's important that we, as clinicians around you as well, don't just see you as the case or the medical condition or impairment. There's more to it. And thinking of your whole self-concept and that shift in social connection, it really needs to be supported really, really well. It might look like employing a psychologist, a counsellor within that space as well. But these aren't things that we should overlook because that quality of life, it takes a really big shift.
And look, Brie, I don't know. It's I don't know the parameters of speech language pathology. I mean, and it's different for Parkinson's to stroke to this to that. I mean, I understand all that, but I just deal with the food and how it affects me. And I don't pretend to be a medical expert. I'm not. I am an expert in food, in wine, in socializing, talking, and presenting. That's what I do. So that's kind of where I lay my hat. But it's interesting that the mind plays such a big part in this as a patient. And I mean, I was just really fortunate that I had the education and the emotional intelligence to be able to manage this on my own and actually work it out and put it in place. So that's kind of what I'm trying to do for everybody else globally. Because when you walk across Spain, and you've got Google Translate and you ask someone in a cafe to do something for you, they go, oh, my sister's got that, or my grandfather or my uncle. And the number of people that I came across that had dysphagia, and they were all Googling me and asking me questions about how you do this and how you do that. So it's a global issue. It's not, not just us here trying to itemize Big Macs.
Surely not. No.
No.
Can we talk a little bit then about your resources? So, of course, this has happened. It's been such a big driver in your life and that trajectory that you're taking now. What are people going to look for, or what's going to be out there in your domain to help people navigate this a bit more? Obviously, it doesn't fall solely on you. I think a lot of people need to be doing more, but because you're such a driver in this space, if people really are looking for resources or more information on this, what can they expect when they look at your website?
Look, this is a movable feast. This is like a business plan. It tweaks, I move it as I learn things, as I talk to people. I have tried to make it the resources that I've created to help clinicians in their practice better understand their patient needs. I've written it so that caregivers can read it and go, oh, that's what they're going through. I've written it, I hope, so that other head and neck cancer patients or dysphagia sufferers can read it and understand it. But mostly it's for clinicians to easily absorb what we're likely to be going through suffering dysphagia. And here are the things that are already available that are being overlooked that you can incorporate into your one-on-ones, into your overall practice with people, that things that you may not have considered around things like IDSI and the four culinary S's, I call them. I mean, it's just about curating all that information into a space that it's there. It's not all over social media and people showing photographs of their tongues and this, and then asking 6,000 people what they think that might be. So it's about curated information with some solid understanding about lived experience and what worked for me. Now, I'm never going to suggest that my resources are going to ensure that you get off a peg tube back to oral eating. That may not be possible for you. But the resources will always look at and focus on that social food confidence side, because in my mind, that is the most important thing, whether you're still peg tube feeding or not. But yes, it's about curating all that information, and the areas you perhaps may not have thought about around culinary, the S's, meal planning, how do you go food shopping, how do you work out what happens at, snacks are the biggest issue for me, my goodness, and hiking and trying to get enough calories in when you can't eat anything. And Portuguese custard tarts and beer eventually don't cut the mustard. So you kind of got to come up with something else. So that's what I've done. And probably the easiest way to find it all is under YvonneMcClaren.com. I'm pushing everything there at the moment. I know many people are subscribed to GAG, Eating Life, which is my online publication, but it'll all be under YvonneMcClaren.com. They're there at this stage.
Brilliant. And I subscribe also to your GAG page, and I love it. I love when they come through. I feel like the insights I get, there's always a mix of humor involved in it.
Yeah, that's very important.
That's right. Okay, so last question. If someone is just starting their dysphagia journey, what is an example of a modified food that you would recommend to help them out or inspire them in the kitchen a little bit? What's your go-to meal that you'd inspire?
Interestingly, people often immediately go to soft. Now, radiated dysphagia, in my experience, is I have a term that I think I have created. It's called grippy food, and the grippy food is the one that drags everything else down with it. But my go-to is silken tofu, and I try to encourage people to look globally with the cuisines. Don't just stay to your lane and what we eat. And in Australia, South Australia is pretty good actually, because we have some really good food here. But look to other cuisines. And for me, once I got over the initial bit, it was Indian foods, lots of sauces. I can manage rice, thank goodness. But things like lentils are good, chickpeas are okay, but there's a skin issue with all of that for me. So yogurt and silken tofu are my protein packed. Get them in somehow. And there's am I allowed to mention brands on here?
Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. Danone Nutricia saved my bacon walking across Europe, because I couldn't eat anything, but they had in Europe, they have those little yogurt. Well, I thought it was yogurt. Turns out it was set milk. Stunning. Yeah, I know. It's very. So I managed to get a banana and some set milk and whip them all in my backpack, and yeah. But yeah, my go-to very much is silken tofu. I can't eat the other tofu, the hard one or the firm one, only silken for me.
No, tofu obviously changes texture depending on the ones you get, but silken is kind of the one that's furthest on the end, where it's the most like a silk.
Slippery.
It's super really well. The taste isn't as heavy as the like more firm tofu, so it blends really well into other like sauces if you want them thicker. Things like that go really well. Amazing.
And that also comes down to your cooking method too. And I don't, people don't know the different cooking methods. You can't assume they do, because they don't. And the 5 mother sauces, if you know how to manage those sauces, you've just blown out your food repertoire, exponentially.
Well, Yvonne, thank you so much for joining us today. And as you
You're
mentioned,
welcome.
there's a whole lot of resources that are really beneficial for people with dysphagia, their caregivers, but also clinicians that can be found on your website. And of course, watch that space because, Yvonne, you have so much more that's going to be coming out in that space that
We do.
is going to be really valuable. So thank you again for today. And
Thanks, Bree, for having me.
You're welcome. Any questions, reach out to myself or Yvonne over her website and we will be sure to get back to you. Thanks, Yvonne.
Thank you. See you, Bree. Bye.
Thanks for joining us. Stay tuned for more episodes. And remember, dysphagia is different for everyone, so reach out to your healthcare team to find what works for you. Check out the Simply Modified Whole Foods Cookbook for more dysphagia inspiration, or you can reach me at Network Speech Pathology.